Hello everyone, and welcome to Mer Hersoner podcast season 3 episode 22. We are live on YouTube and Facebook. It is Thursday, April 13th, 2023. We are back after taking some time off. I'm your host, Vic and Karaoghlanian, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Mr. Mike Balyan, where we discuss our great Armenian history, covering different eras, topics, and people. Please hit that like button. Make sure you are subscribed and share with friends and family. We have a special guest with us tonight. Our topic of discussion is going to be 100 years of Armenian film history, right? And our guest today is Armen Karaoghlanian. I said that right. From the Armenian Film Society. How are you, Armen?
I'm doing well. How are you both doing?
Good.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We kind of met you at the event you had, sort of. Yeah, at the event you had, which was honoring great Armenian women in film, right? I forget what the
Armenian women in film industry.
Film industry, yeah. And we were both there, and
Great event.
Yeah, it was a great event. We were
bunch of cool characters.
Yeah. No, we were really impressed. It was
a bunch of cool characters.
Yeah, I mean, these women from all walks of life were telling their story, how they got into the film industry and everything, and very proud of all of them, from actress to producers to directors, right?
Yeah. And everything in between. And I agree. They're so animated. Yeah. They're so insightful. Yeah. It was a really fun conversation. Yeah. They made it really informative and entertaining.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we had a great time.
Too. There was a lot of
very inspirational.
Very inspirational. A lot of motivational information for anybody who sometimes can be intimidating industry to get into.
Yeah, and I think that's the scariest part for a lot of people. Not being able to approach some of these major players in Hollywood, and obviously
there's a stigma to it.
Right, we have so many questions about how to break in and how to get into the industry, and they made it very open. Yeah, and people like them make it more accessible.
Yeah, that was really cool. That
you saw the human side of.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Especially some of the celebrities that were there. Yeah. I want to thank everybody who's joining us live tonight. Feel free to chat in the little chat area over there, and Mike will monitor it. Welcome, abiding.
We'll talk about the event.
I know. I know everybody's been emailing us, sending us messages. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk about the event at the end of the show. Armen, before we kind of dive into our conversation, can you give us a little bit, like a small bio about yourself, where you were born, where you grew up, how you got involved in the film industry, and about the Armenian Film Society?
Sure. So I was born in Jordan. My dad's side of the family was from Jordan, and my dad met my mom in Armenia while he was studying there. But I moved here when I was just under a year old. So I've spent most of my life in LA, and growing up, film was the only thing that I really truly cared about. I throughout my life, throughout sort of, getting older, I sort of thought about, what will I do with my life? What will I do with myself? But I kept coming back to film. Film was the unifying factor in my family. Family movie nights were the opportunities for us to get together as a family. Yeah. And it was the one time where we would all be together, and we would laugh together, cry together, be thrilled together. And so film was always a passion of mine, an interest of mine. Even as a very young boy, I would write stories, and I would tell stories, and I would get all my cousins together and put on, plays and entertain, my family members. Yeah. Because I think at the heart of it all, I was just so interested in storytelling. Yeah. And then as I got older, I sort of, started wondering, well, what am I going to do? I had sort of lost interest in school, sort of around high school, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do.
Which high school did you go to?
I went to Glenda High School. I went to Armenian school up until the 8th grade, and I was a straight A student, 4.0 student. But around high school, I started asking myself and thinking about these questions of, what's the end goal here? Yeah. Everyone's sort of like, you're in high school now. You have to think about college. You have to think about what your major is.
Yeah.
And it all felt very arbitrary to me. And I suddenly went from a straight A student to a very poor student academically, but it was because I lacked motivation, right? Yeah. And it wasn't until college where I met my wife, and suddenly, you know, we were talking about our future and what that would look like. And she asked me, "What do you want to do?" You know, and I remember we were at dinner with my my mom and dad, and we were all four of us talking. And it was sort of around that time where I got to make these decisions of what the next step is. And I said, the only thing I care about is film. And I want to work in film in some capacity. Mm-hmm. And they were all like, that's what you've always loved. Why don't you pursue it? And so I went to USC Film School. Okay. Somehow got in because, again,
somehow,
all throughout high school, you know, I did very poorly because I lacked that motivation. Mm-hmm. Early college, right before I met my wife, again, did very poorly. But when my wife was sort of, you know, she also was like, she excelled academically. She was, you know, never missed a day of school, you know, type. Suddenly she motivated me to take things seriously, but suddenly the pathway became clear. Yeah. I want to go to film school. And I remember talking to my counselor at community college. I said, I want to go to USC Film School. And she laughed at me. She was like, with your grades, you know, but my wife was very, very helpful in putting together a path for me and sort of like, these are the classes you need to take. And suddenly I was a 4.0 student again, straight A student, because now I had purpose and motivation.
And you had a strong woman behind you.
Well, beyond that, you enjoyed what you were doing finally.
Yeah. But there was a clear end goal. I'm going to go to USC Film School or film school, and I'm going to work in film. Maybe I don't know exactly doing what yet, but in some capacity. And then every single class I was taking, I knew it was a stepping stone to get to that final place. So I got into film school, and at that time, I was reading Yerevan magazine. I don't know if you guys remember.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I would just read it to, you know, read about all these different stories, and all I could do was, find myself searching for like anything related to film or Armenian film, and they didn't have anything. And so I reached out and I said, "Can I write about Armenian movies?" Not really knowing. Not knowing what that would mean, right? And they were like, "Sure, come in." And so we talked about me having like an online column and an in-print column. And
what year is this, by the way?
This is 2011.
11, okay. Yeah. So about 12 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and I was still in school. I was still taking classes, and I started writing about Armenian films for them. What that meant was I was going through some of the older Armenian films. I was getting them at Parserian Records at the time.
Wait, that was in Glendale, was it not?
Parserian's in Hollywood. Oh. I was getting it from the Hollywood.
No, but then they had one.
There was one in Glendale too. Yeah. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, it was just like I was either rediscovering films or just discovering them, because there was a lot of stuff that I hadn't seen, and I was watching them and I was writing about them, and then I was also writing about what's happening currently with Armenian filmmakers at that time. And it was quite popular. You know, people really responded to it. I got to interview and speak to some great people. I got to be on set with Adam Egoyan, who's one of my favorite filmmakers, and I got to shadow him for about a week when I was filming here. And it was like, you know, access that you wouldn't really ever get. And suddenly that like love was born. At that same time, I started teaching at Woodbury University in Burbank, even though I hadn't graduated from college yet. And I was doing all of these things, and suddenly I was discovering things about myself like, I don't need to be a director. I don't need to be a writer or a producer. I could create a pathway for myself that maybe doesn't exist yet. And obviously now I realize that that's Armenian Film Society. But at the time, I wanted to do anything that felt right to me in the film, space.
It's almost like wearing multiple hats, right? It doesn't matter. Like it's almost like a composer, right? Like there's so many things you can bring in together, and I feel like that's what you do, right?
It's interesting how, like he said, he almost sort of discovered this path that nobody else had explored.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is really fascinating. Well, I mean, obviously continue to tell your story, but I'd love to know more.
In film school, I'm taking these great classes by these great professors, and I have Steven Spielberg coming to my class, and you know, Ron Howard and Paul Thomas Anderson, some of my idols.
Wait, what was the class though? What was this?
Well,
what were
that
you
was
teaching?
Well, no, sorry, they weren't coming to my class. That was while I was still at USC as a student. In my class at Woodbury, I was teaching. It was a screening series where I would show films and then I would bring in directors to talk about them. And what happened was, I started bringing in, you know, I had grown a network at this time of people that I'd come to know. So I would show usually films that had like screened at the Sundance Film Festival or other film festivals. And then I would bring in the directors to talk about them. And they were all very nice about it. They were like, wow, this college is in Burbank and it's like 10 minutes away from my office. I'll stop by for an hour. And the class became popular because, again, I was so truly passionate about having these conversations with these filmmakers. But while I'm still in school at that time, I'm taking all these different classes and I have all these great, you know, filmmakers coming to my classes. And I'm taking classes like history of international cinema, and I'm learning about films made in all these different countries. And then nothing on Armenian film. In fact, I took a class, a film theory class, one of the most sort of senior classes at USC. And I saw in the syllabus that we were watching a Sergei Parajanov film. Yeah. And I was so excited. Finally, we get to watch something made by an Armenian. And the professor, who's very well respected, gets up and starts lecturing. And he says, we're going to watch a film by a Ukrainian filmmaker, and mentions nothing about his Armenian background. I went up to him after that. Wow. You know, this young kid still in school. And I went up to him and I said, you know, he's Armenian. You know, he's, you know, you have to acknowledge that part of his life and that part of his background, because he spent 30 minutes to an hour lecturing about him and said nothing about his Armenian background. And he sort of listened to me as I was sort of like passionately pleading to him. And you're sort of like, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Wow. Next week, he opens with a 15-minute sort of, you know, opening where he acknowledges that he should have done a little bit more research.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the man has a museum in
But you know what? That shows how big of him to accept that.
Totally.
And actually come back and say, hey, you know what? I didn't do my research.
And he did his homework.
Yeah,
you know, you could tell that he went back, did more homework, researched his background, and you know his upbringing and how he sort of came to be such a notable filmmaker. And I love that. I appreciate.
And that's thanks to you for having the courage to step up to him, because a lot of people might have just been afraid because you don't want to approach someone at that stature.
And whatnot, right?
So that's big of you to do.
Yeah, and I didn't really know, I didn't have this like grand plan. All I knew was, I had grown up hearing about Armenian films and watching some Armenian films, and I knew that they were good, even as a young.
They are good,
and they are good.
They are really good.
They are.
But they're not being studied. And they're not. And even then, is that when a filmmaker like Sergei Parajanov gets like a chapter in one of our textbooks, it doesn't acknowledge sort of his background. And I had a problem with that. And that sort of started making me think about, well, we might be able to kind of bridge this gap a little bit more. So the short version is Yerevan magazine shut down because they ran out of money. Mm-hmm. And I stopped teaching at Woodbury University. And suddenly these two things that were a big part of my life were taken away from me, but I wanted to still talk and write and think about Armenian films, and I still wanted to show films and have conversations with filmmakers. So my wife and I were getting married around 2015, and we were talking about we should form a group, or we should have a screening series for Armenian films, and what would that look like? And so we got married, went on our honeymoon, came back, and we started Armenian Film Society.
No time wasted.
Love instead of kids, Armenian Film Society. Honeymoon, what are we doing? Armenian Film Society.
Plan.
So tell us a bit about Armenian Film. So what is its purpose?
Sure.
Why was it put together? Well, we kind of know what you put it together, but what does it do now?
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about why we started it, because originally it was, let's have events, let's have screenings where we would show both older Armenian films and contemporary films made by Armenians, and let's have a place to time and place to talk about these films. So we started off doing monthly events at Abril Books in Glendale.
Okay.
And we would do them on the first Friday of every month. And we did that for 5 years. Every first Friday of the month, we would show a film, and then we would bring in a filmmaker who worked on the film, and we would have a conversation. It was either that or I would show a film and I would lecture.
Can I ask how the turnouts were initially?
Oh my gosh. So we started...
I'm really curious if how the gradual progression was.
So we started... if you remember the old Abril Books location on Broadway.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, Broadway. That's right. Yeah.
So right next door to the gallery. And it was not a theater, right? It was just a gallery. And Arno, who's a friend of mine, was really into this idea. And he's like, I have a projector, I have some speakers. We can makeshift, a screening theater in here. I said, cool. Let's do it. So we picked the first film. And I think we could maybe fit like 50, 60 people in there. And I honestly thought to myself, look, if it's me and a couple of friends and a couple of strangers that walk in, that's good enough. Because again, we're not thinking like a business. We're not thinking like an organization.
Yeah.
And we thought we could just have like movie nights. And that first night we were completely full of people.
Wow.
And the second month and the third month, it was just the same back to back.
And which movies were you showing?
So we started off with Adam Egoyan's first film, which is called Next of Kin, which again, for a first event, maybe not the most popular thing to show. It's a 1984 film, and it's super low budget. But I wanted to kick off with that. I thought, hey, I could lecture on it. It might be fun. I think the second film, Eric Nazarian came in and he showed America, which is an Elia Kazan film.
Wow.
So really cool. So not super popular films, but films that I think meant something to us, and we were so passionate about it, and we realized people were hungry for this type of...
That was going to be one of my questions at some point, was just like, you probably at some point started to figure out the hunger or like the thirst for people to kind of latch back on to something from our culture.
What was happening was, and by the way, we had 14, 15-year-olds there, all the way up to people in their 80s. And what was happening was people were coming because they either had grown up on these films and haven't seen them, at least with an audience, for maybe decades. And then the younger generation was coming out because they had never seen Gikor, Gator Meyerking, any of these films. And so we realized that there's an appetite for this. And we formed this community there for those first couple of years, and we would show really obscure films. We showed a film by Sarki Muradian, who's a major player in the history of Armenian films, and he told us, no one's shown this film publicly for 40 years, and you guys are the first. And so suddenly we were like, this is very necessary to kind of build on some of those initial ideas that we had. But that's where it started. We've evolved since then. Over the course of time, we started thinking beyond these screenings that we were doing, and we started thinking about some of the problems that we wanted to solve, which is there's not an effective way for Armenians in the industry to network with one another. Everybody felt so disconnected. I knew firsthand that there was a lot of Armenians working in the industry, but I could also tell that they're not really connected to one another. And so we started bridging that gap. We became a nonprofit. We sort of outlined what some of our goals and initiatives would be for the next couple of years. And then COVID happened, and suddenly, we lost our home. We lost like the ability to have in-person events. But COVID was also the best for our organization because we did two things. We expanded our reach because we did virtual events like a couple days after lockdown. Like we started doing Instagram lives really before they became popular. And we suddenly realized, wow, there's a whole audience out there who's never been able to come to one of our events. We need to think more globally. And then the other thing was we got to map out while the world was on pause.
On pause, yeah.
It's like, let's map out what the future looks like and all the stuff we've thought about doing. And now we've been working on those initiatives.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What a great story.
Wow. Good stuff, man.
I mean, you know, that just says when you have passion towards something, I mean, your story is beautiful because it was, like you said, it was all about film, right? Everything was about the passion. And eventually you followed that passion and look where you are now. So,
like I said, all I've ever really cared about was with films. I was a kid sitting in a theater looking for IAN and YAN last name.
Hold it fast. We're not leaving. It's credit.
Yeah. And I thought I was the only one, truly. You know, when you're like 10.
It's like all of our little secret, man.
Exactly. and I think most of us we're around the same age and we all grew up here. So for us as Armenians, as children growing up here, like you said, when we go to the movies, that was the thing. Whenever you saw the grip, you're like, we'll take it. Yeah, we'll take it. Yeah. So
moving on up in the left.
So you're here today because, you know, this year, 2023, is celebrating 100 years of Armenian film and cinema. So, you know, we're historical, I guess.
And we want to kind of dive into the history of Armenian,
you know, just because we're a history podcast, doesn't mean it's just history, like as in, so it's yeah. So we always wanted to do something about Armenian film and movies, and this is perfect. So, we got some questions for you, and we just want to kind of dive deep and have a conversation. And we feel like you're the right person to kind of talk about the past 100 years.
So, I mean, we all know our basic history. After the Bolshevik Revolution, Armenia gains its independence in one form or another. And since it's the 100-year anniversary, so let's go back to 1923. 1923 is somewhat considered, if not considered, the birth of Armenian film. Is there any light you'd like to shed on this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. 1923 is the year that we sort of refer to as the beginning of Armenian cinema. April 16, in fact, in a couple of days. April 16, 1923.
Wow, almost to the day.
Yeah.
Wow, we timed it right.
That was an accident, by the way, guys. Don't joke.
Yeah. So in a couple of days, we'll be sort of commemorating the 100 years of Armenian cinema. And that's really only because that was the date that the Armenian State Committee of Cinema was established by government decree. They sort of said, you know, private cinemas will be nationalized, and this is the date. But it's not like on that date, someone in Armenia picked up a camera and started making a film. Yeah. There's a prehistory there.
Okay.
And there's obviously many other films and many other projects that were made at this time. You know, there were Russian cameramen. There were, you know, films made. One of the earliest projects made, I think it was 1913 in Egypt, about an Armenian, you know, the first Armenian subject in a film. So there's all these different projects that are sort of happening earlier on in sort of the early years of cinema.
Of cinema, period.
And cinema is, you know, I think the birth of, you know, if you look at cinema itself is established in 1895, right?
So still in its infancy.
Still in its infancy. I mean, cinema's only 100 or so years old. It's one of the youngest, you know, forms of art. But I want to acknowledge that prehistory because it's important that there were films and projects and documentaries being made. Now, a lot of that is lost. A lot of that, you know, was made elsewhere. And there were filmmakers that were, you know, even coining terms like Armenian cinema. In fact, one of the first documentary projects was just called Armenian cinema, Haikakan cinema. And I think it was, you know, just a documentary that was filmed in those early years. But after 1923, or on 1923, that's sort of what we refer to as the birth of Armenian cinema. And sort of everything comes from then. In 1924, high film was established, which, you know,
a lot of people don't know that. High film, 1924.
I didn't.
Yeah.
You know?
It was Armen Film, became High Film, and then I think one of the earliest, you know, films, you know, came in 1924, 1925, and then that was it. That we were off to the races. We started producing films, and obviously we have a couple decades there of some rich, you know, pieces of work, but that's sort of the beginning of it all.
When you talk about some of the films that were lost, obviously this is possibly because of the genocide, and you know, I'm sure there were things being filmed in Western Armenia at that time. Has there anything been discovered that would have been like a gem that by accident, that was a relic that's been passed down and people didn't know it was a film from, let's say, maybe in 1916 or 17?
Yeah, and they were filming at that time, so certainly. I don't think anything from those early years have been found and discovered, but I do want to say that the majority of silent films in general in film history, I think 95%, if I'm not mistaken, is considered lost. And obviously we have a lot of early silent films. We have films from the 1800s in general. And so a lot of that does exist, but the majority,
are you talking about generally?
Generally.
Okay.
Generally,
that's crazy.
In cinema history, a lot of those early films are lost. From what I understand, Armenia's done a good job at preserving its films. Now, I know we don't have a lot of the early ones that I was talking about, but also you have to keep in mind that a lot of those early films were not completed projects. I think there was a filmmaker in early 10s, 1908, 1910, somewhere around then.
Oh, wow.
Filmed a project and the entire negative was exposed. So the whole film was just ruined before, right? So it was also early,
hurts.
early, and also these films, these early documentaries, they were like the funerals of
prominent figures or whatnot.
Prominent figures,
Pretty figured.
Yeah, not exactly.
That's like when the sound guy doesn't hit the record
Yeah,
button.
exactly. This is history, guys. Make sure you capture it.
Oops. When we talk about Armenian cinema, can you kind of explain what that really means? Because I think people don't quite understand.
Yeah. So Armenian cinema, I mean, for me, I think it's, films produced in Armenia, but national cinema as a whole, there's different ways to define it. And even with different organizations and different awards committees, they all have their own metrics and different ways of looking at it, because some look at it as films made in that country. Others will look at it as films in that language, or films predominantly made by a cast and crew that are of that, nationality. For me, Armenian cinema is films that come out of Armenia, films that are produced in Armenia. Now, if somebody makes an all Armenian film in the US with an all Armenian cast, all Armenian crew, and it's in the Armenian language, and it's about the Armenian culture, is that a part of Armenian cinema? I mean,
it's a good point.
Yeah.
Interesting point.
And obviously with the diaspora and all the filmmakers that we have now, I think it's still part of Armenian cinema as an extension. But typically the way we look at national cinema and the way we look at Armenian cinema is films being produced in Armenia.
Okay.
With the resources there, funding, which is a big factor of it as well. So that's, I think, the definition of it.
What are some of the first Armenian films?
So the first feature-length Armenian film is a film called Namus.
Namus?
Yeah.
No, that's
Okay.
kind of cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Do tell.
1925. And, black and white, very rough, but very interesting. Made by Hamo Beknazarian.
Was it a silent film?
Silent film.
Silent film.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
So cool.
And Hamo Beknazarian is considered like the father of Armenian film. He's an actor turned director turned like de facto representative of Armenian films. And it's it's like a Romeo and Juliet story. It's a film about, it's a film about a couple that their families bring together, and it's got a lot of very interesting elements to it. It's very interesting. It exists. You can watch it.
Yeah.
And it's very, very good, I think, from like a historical perspective. Pepo, also by Hamo Beknazarian, 1935, first sound picture that was made. These are the two most frequently discussed.
It's 100 years old, man.
100 years old.
1920.
Are these available online?
Yeah.
They are. Was it High Film or?
Yeah. So the National Cinema Center of Armenia has actually done a really good job at not just preserving these older Armenian films, but restoring them and then making them available on YouTube for free.
And they're good. I mean, the quality they did a great job.
And when I was talking about earlier going to Parserian Records and getting these DVD copies of films, they were DVD copies of DVD copies of VHS copies. They were very
oh my
rough.
God, the pixelation.
No subtitles. You know, if you can't understand parts of it. These are presented in a great format.
That's awesome.
So Namus and what was it? Peppo?
Yeah,
Check the Namus and Peppo.
I don't know if you've seen, you know, films from the 20s. You know, films. You know,
American
right.
films.
They're you know, but if you're watching it from the historical context, you're watching it from like cinema history. They're very interesting, but they're kind of strange and
they are, but the storytelling was different because some of them, of course, that didn't have any sound. You had to be able to portray the story without sound,
and it's very
And it's I mean, think about it now, guys. Like how difficult that would be.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear sound, you see colors, you see explosions and things like this that portray a story. But now you're telling a story without any sound. Yeah. And then you get that random cutout that the little whatever they were called, the little title card, and that's it.
They're very strange, but I mean that like in a really great way. They're very like dynamic.
Yeah.
They're very kinetic. Their use of like sound and music, you know, obviously when I talk about sound, I'm talking about, you know, added sound effects and things like that.
Just the music alone, the piano, let's say that when it's a sad scene, the way they play the piano or whatever instrument they're using, I mean, I watched a lot of silent film and
the old films are just
and I want to check these out because I haven't watched these. I didn't even know about them. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
I think they're definitely worth looking at, especially in the context of like Armenian cinema. These are very important films. They defined, you know, the foundations of it all, and they're very important from that perspective.
Yeah. Now, obviously, early 20s, we had the Bolshevik Revolution. The Soviet Union was formed, and Armenia became part of the Soviet Union. What kind of an effect did the Soviet era have on Armenian film and filmmakers, directors?
So, you know, the way it worked, and this is very interesting, but the way it worked was there was a pool of funds for all the different states, and they would get sort of a piece of the pie. And so Armenia was getting access to equipment and financing and resources through a piece of that. And a lot of the films that sort of came out during this time was as a result of having that sort of access. We talk about like the golden age of cinema. You talk about the golden age of Armenian cinema. And for us, it was really those years between 60s and 70s and
like
80s.
Like the 50s, 60s, somewhere around there, yeah. I mean, I know it was with music. Right, there was a big explosion with music in Armenia, I would say.
Music, but mostly film, I would say, because if you look at all the great films...
I'm looking at it from family glasses.
Yeah. No, but that's when you look at Armenian film, like the classics we talk about, Katorme Yerking, Ikors, and so forth. I mean, so many to name, are all from that. That's where it like started exploding, and Frunzik is one of the main actors who was just part of that. You know, every movie he's like he's like the lead actor. You know, he's the guy. That's who you turn to.
Yeah, but we just had access to production equipment and resources and financing and all of that, which, you know, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, a little bit later, but that's not the case now. And I think that's, if you look at the number of films we were making back then versus the number of films we're making now, obviously drastically different.
I feel like maybe for some reason the Soviet Union saw the creative side of Armenians because we are creative people. I don't know if this question even makes sense, but do you feel like
the allocation? Are you asking about like if the money was allocated to like one of the specific states or republics or
like
something
to Armenia
like this,
more?
Right?
Because I don't know if I see Kazakhstan making, you know. I mean, nothing towards Kazakhstan, but I'm just saying, like, as
it's a valid point.
It's a good question. I'm actually not. I'm not entirely sure about how the allocation of funds worked, but I do know that there were a ton of creatives coming out of Armenia.
Yeah,
you know, like Hamobek Nazarian, who I was just talking about, who directed the first film, Namus. You know, he's someone that lived in Russia and was making films and, you know, developing projects over there. And so we had this incredible talent. So I think that's part of the reason why then we got so much out of that during that time. It was very prosperous for
and the reason I asked that question is because I remember a lot of films were coming out that were made in Russia with Armenian actors in Russian, right? There's so many, even keep talking about Frunzik, so many movies he's done that he's playing
in the Russian market.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I feel like there was this, they realized that, hey, this culture has something, you know, we just know how creative Armenians are. So
no, I agree. And I think if you look at, all the different films that then came around that time, the subject matters of them and their take. I mean, you just mentioned that they're fun and they are incredibly fun and entertaining. But when you start examining them from a filmmaking perspective, you realize that there's a lot of very innovative stuff happening. I've seen films recently, some Armenian films that I've been catching up on that I've never seen. And there's been a couple that I've found so fascinating, like very ahead of its time, you know, watching films from the 60s or the 50s. And I know a little bit of cinema history, just like broader cinema history. And I think to myself, I haven't seen that, you know, and
being
American
used today.
films. And it's sort of, it's hard for me not to think about like, we might've been the first to try that or do that.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of very interesting moments like that as well.
like when you say like, okay, like what, camera movement or
staging, camera movement. There's use of music, like a musical cue. There's a lot of that happens, especially in some of the more popular Armenian films. And of course, I'm not saying that, well, we were the first to do it and then others did it and that's why it became popular. But I do think we were experimenting enough. I mean, we're talking like film at that point is just
it wasn't cookie cutter.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was cookie
trying. And by the, you know, also that there wasn't the access we have now where it's like I can watch all of like Romanian cinema history like next month if I wanted to.
Mention that like there wasn't like, because you had that Cold War era happening, it wasn't like, you know, you had access where they could watch American films and get inspiration. Maybe there was some underground stuff happening.
That's what I was about to say. We've all heard the stories from parents like, oh, a
lot of, I mean, the Indian movies too. Well, that was later that was more in the 80s.
Yeah, but even then, you know, unless you saw it in a theater and you saw only what was available, it's not like, you know, the early Armenian filmmakers were watching the classic, you know, silent films and early sound films. They just probably didn't have access to them. So a lot of what they're doing in these films, it's kind of made in a vacuum. They're experimenting, they're trying, there's things that work, there's things that don't work. And then they're then developing their own sort of like language.
You would think, right? I mean, just off the top of your head, you would think that the Soviet Union, you must control and do this propaganda, blah blah blah, right? But it doesn't sound like it. Like,
no.
I'm sure there was a little.
There's also a ton of censorship. There's a ton of you know things that you can't do.
Sure.
But that was also the case, you know, obviously, you know, in American cinema,
of course,
with the regulations that we had here, and obviously that then very much impacted like Sergei Parajanov's life. But
don't you think it was pretty loose as well at the same time? Because I mean, there were some movies that came out. I mean, especially the comedies. There was some, you know, the adult flavor was always in there somehow.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's also like a difference between, you know, adult humor and saying things that might be against
certain like church and state.
Yeah. How the Soviet Union is always, you know, people imagine it as this conservative, very strict, but no, it wasn't like that. I mean, there's movies, even Russian movies. I mean, well, I don't know how it is in, what do you call in thing, but Chokhtsansar is 3 or whatever. I don't know what the name of the movie is. I mean, it was, you know, that was an adult comedy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. They're definitely having fun.
Yeah.
There's room for comedy.
Of course.
And then there's, like he said, censorship with, let's say, certain types of political content, right? Depending on the interpretation of it. Okay, jumping a little forward, what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union with Armenian cinema?
So we didn't have the means that we had at that time, obviously. Like we weren't getting funding directly from them. We didn't have access to the equipment and the production resources. And really, I mean, I could talk about what it's like now. We have like the National Cinema Center of Armenia gets its funding directly from the government. There's a certain amount of money that's allocated, but it's a fraction of what it used to be. And so, again, not having...
You say fraction of what it used to be.
Of what it
used to be from what time?
Soviet era.
From the Soviet. Okay, not like after the Soviet Union, there was still a nice budget and then...
No, that was all gone.
Okay, so it's not like the more current government kind of slashed it. It's something that's been like that.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
It's been that way ever since. And again, it's not just the funding of it, it's access to equipment and resources that we were getting, directly at that time. And it's no reason why, we look at films like Gikor and other films in the 80s, and then just kind of a drop off, after the 90s, early 2000s, we're not really getting the amount of films that we were getting before.
What would you say the last film that was from that Soviet era would be? Would you know off the top of your head?
I mean, I would probably say it's one of those two, like Gikor and Kator Meyerking. I think first of all, those are some of the I know, and also
Kator Meyerking
we
is
talk
something
about
else.
those films a lot, but truly they are some of the best.
Oh yeah,
not just best Armenian films, they're some of the best films. But that was
I don't care what
80s.
time of the day it is. If you put that on, I will watch it.
It's great. We have a clip of
we have Gikor. You want to show Gikor first?
Gikor.
Okay,
I'd love
this
to
is a
talk
small
about that
clip.
one.
Yeah.
Ой, книks тихо.
Gikorcan. Korbacan.
Охчи, лочахка, лавкали. Ватацуй.
So that was a clip from
Sneak peek.
What's a
Yeah, I mean, I get goosebumps when I watch that opening. And if you And the reason why I wanted to show that is because if you look at like the staging of the actors, the blocking, the way the scenes are composed, there's landscape imagery. There's a shot of all the kids. It's like a Wes Anderson sort of like perfectly, centered, composed shot. And then the use of music, the Tigran Mansourian score that kicks in there. It's just beautiful. It's just great.
Yeah. And this was made when?
Early 80s.
Early, I think 82 or 84, something like that. Yeah. That's, I mean, for us, we remember this stuff. We grew up on it, especially like when I was in Armenia. So it's something that's part of my life. And every time I revisit that, and it not only brings back these amazing memories of me watching these films in Armenia as a kid, but then I get to share it with my kids.
Yeah.
I'll sit them down and have them watch it. At first, they're like, what is this?
Well, because they're so used to what
the quick movements and everything nowadays, right? Yeah. But then once they kind of start getting into it, they're like, oh, okay, I see there's a story. This is cool. They kind of slow down themselves because they're so used to the quickness of film here or cartoons, so but yeah, man, I can watch these anytime. It's amazing.
And there's just like the subject matter of these films. Obviously, we've made a lot of films about very difficult lives and these characters that are have these very unfortunate lifestyles and difficult situations that they're like navigating, but they're human stories. These are, and it's such a part of our culture because
that's the question I wanted to kind of segue into, was just that was most of the stuff that was portrayed was just a lifestyle in the country. And and beyond that, I mean, fully cultural, but beyond that, like you had mentioned earlier, was the comedy. Right? I mean, we are a pretty funny bunch.
Yeah. I mean, our comedy in theater is unbelievable.
It is. And obviously we have such great comedy films too. So it was either films like Geekode, it was like the Martik, which is like a very
Martik is another great. And I encourage everybody who is is watching us, joining us live, and later on will listen to this, go again. It was Armenian. What was the YouTube?
National Cinema Center of Armenia.
National Cinema Center of Armenia. They have all this stuff there, guys. High quality. There's subtitles as well. Go watch them. You really enjoy them, and just be patient. Some of them are slow in the beginning, but trust me, you will love the story. Especially the comedies are amazing, and. But again, I really want to thank everybody who's joining us. The comments are great. People are loving what we're talking about, and they're loving the clips. I wanted to ask you, who are some of the most, let's say, notable figures throughout Armenian film history?
Yeah, I think we talked about a couple of them. There's many others. Aram Khachaturian obviously is a great. I think we all know all the body of work that he's had, but he's also beyond Armenian cinema. His music is in 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's considered one of the greatest films, if not the greatest film ever made.
Yeah. My mom played violin for him a bunch of times. Yeah, no joke.
It's amazing. Yeah. These are
I have videos.
Yeah,
many.
Proud
moment.
Totally, because he's not obviously within the realm of Armenian film. He's a god, but when you go beyond that, he's a well-respected, incredibly established filmmaker who's worked with some of the greats. So Sargsyan, who's in the clip that we just saw, he's in many of the classic Armenian films. He's also in Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris.
Something about him.
Oh, he's phenomenal.
I don't know what it when I see him act or saw him act in all these movies, he gives you this father figure feeling, but comfort at the same time. Respect, a little bit of fearfulness towards him. I mean, it's so dynamic. Like I don't even know how many different ways to describe.
It's a heavy presence, but peaceful. Presence.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's it.
You just put it perfectly.
Yeah, because you think of, that Vorasmen hired of Tsaner Banavorutsuni, but then he's not like, oh, I'm going to crush your skull.
He's gentle.
His presence walks into the room.
Yeah.
And you feel it.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's incredible. And Gikod, he's such a heartbreaking, tragic character. But, even in the film that I was talking about, Andrei Tarkovsky, again, one of the top directors in film history, and he's got a pivotal role in Solaris, which is considered one of the greatest science fiction films of all time. So the point that I'm trying to make is even these notable figures in Armenian history, they've transcended Armenian cinema. Mm-hmm. But, other directors like Henrik Malyan, obviously we touched on some of the actors, but there have been a lot over the years. And again, they've made films that kind of just go beyond films for our community.
We've mentioned already throughout the conversation a couple of the prominent films dating back to the mid-20s. What other notable films can you shed some light on and probably educate? Not only, Vic probably knows a lot more than I do, that's for sure. Educate me and educate some of the viewers.
I want to talk about Kator Meyerking, and I want to talk about Menking Mer Hersoner.
Do you want to show the clip first?
I'd love to start with Kator Meyerking.
Okay.
Koves kalesi. Aşkarken bir vakın artığas. Յետ մի մնար, կովես եգուր, բամը կեցիր, հովագիմ, ձո, հովագիմ,
հրամե գրիքորա,
վաղը եգուր արդակնոցը մակրե, չմորնաս,
ուքամ, Գրիքոր աղա, արարքըտ ազնիվ կսեպեմ։
Զավակ ետի պահեմ,
All right. So that was a clip from Kator Meyerking, one of my favorite movies. Like I said, I can watch that any time of the day. And every time, same feelings. The emotions are always the same. And it's such even though I've seen this 1,000 times, I know exactly what's going to happen still, especially when that music kicks in.
One of those movies,
and
man.
You see those white doves and it's just like, oh my God.
I love that film. I was watching part of this film in preparation, and I'm a father now. You know, my son is 1.5 years old, and I look at some of the sequences in this film, and the one that we saw, like this life lesson of like, don't be afraid, walk next to me, and this parental figure of this father figure. And I love what the film does with its reoccurring motifs. Like, if you haven't seen the film, this character has got his head in the sky always looking at these birds flying above, and that becomes a reoccurring thing. And him walking with, essentially who is his father figure in the film, becomes like a reoccurring visual too until he grows older. But like I agree with you, it's one of those films where I've seen it so many times, but every time I watch it, I feel like I haven't seen it. I feel like I'm just surprised by it.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's shot so well. The story behind it is amazing,
and the music,
and like you said, every time you watch it, you kind of catch something new, a new lesson that you might have missed, right?
And I think a lot of the lessons from these films are ingrained into like our parents, our grandparents who grew up watching these films and passed those lessons on to us. I remember like watching some of these films like as I sort of like got access to them over the years, and I go, I've heard these things, and this is where it probably came from, so.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask next was, like, what are some of the topics or some of the things that, let's say, the films were trying to portray? You know what I mean? Like, what were, like, family values or traditional values or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah, as you saw from the two examples that we saw, it's just village life, and it's just about family dynamics and being able to make a living and survive, and the challenges and the obstacles. There's all those like life lessons jam packed into what people are actually going through.
Yeah, those of you in the audience who's asking, that was Katorma Yerking. It basically means piece of the sky. I believe there are subtitles, right? Is there subtitles?
That one was with Armenian subtitles, but is there anything in English subtitles?
The majority of the films that they have on their YouTube channel doesn't have English subtitles. Some of them do, but the majority of them don't. That's something that we've been talking to them about having, and they're working on adding more of these subtitles. My goal here is that if you show those two films to a non-Armenian audience with subtitles, they'll really understand the value and potential of Armenian cinema. And it's important for us to have subtitles.
Of course. It's the same thing we've talked about as the biggest problem in current. It doesn't matter if we're talking about history, whatever we're talking about, we need to bring it to the masses, which is in English. Why do we do this podcast again? I mean, English. It's becoming almost like a broken record now, but again, we do it in English for a purpose, is to bring the non-Armenians to learn about history, film, whatever it is. We have to cater to them because, look, we're sitting here and having this great conversation. I understand what you're feeling. You understand what I'm feeling. Why? Because we're Armenian and we grew up. We understand the words that's being spoken. We get the music. But to non-Armenian, we have to figure out a way how to make them understand this.
I totally agree. And I think that's something that we're navigating and dealing with when it comes to films being made today.
Yeah.
Because I one of the big things is, I think the films being made today, we need to ask ourselves, who are they being made for? You have films about the Armenian genocide, and you have films that are about, our culture and our people. But I think that's one of the big kind of like talking points is, are we making this for ourselves, or are we making it for non-Armenian audiences as well? I actually think some of these older films do a better job at appealing beyond sort of the
because
culture.
classic movies, doesn't matter whatever the culture, it could be Armenian, it could be American, it could be whatever it is, they were actually art.
They're universal.
They weren't something that kind of went on this track to gain funds, right? Because it's just what's in. Because you know probably better than I do, or better than he does, film industry kind of goes with trends. What's hot right now? What's going to work? Who's going to fund this kind of story, right? Other things get shelved. Back then, I kind of want to say, I mean, call me naive, but I kind of want to say they didn't think about that kind of stuff. If it was a good story and it could be shown on the screen, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it was such. It was an art form. Yeah, it definitely was an art form, and that's why I think it was such an honest documentation of our lives, because it wasn't made with a certain agenda. It wasn't made for like, who is this? What are we trying to achieve here? It was just sort of, let's show the daily life that we're living, and through that, there's universality and all of that.
Yeah.
Let's show another clip. This is Mer Hersoner. You guys. if this isn't one of the best acting he's done in this movie.
I chose this clip for that reason.
Yeah,
Some of the
and
finest acting.
so here we go.
Մտածելու բան չկա։ Ռոպեի գործ է, ստորագրի սրտելս թեթևանա։
Ծեծիր։ Մինչև չծեծես ոչինչ չեմ ասի։
Սովետական միլիցիան ծեծին դեմ է, ծեծը սովետական միլիցիայում ընդունված չէ։
Դե որ չես ծեծում էլ ուրիշ ինչ կա։
Ստորագրի ու գնա։
Անգրագետ եմ, տարերը չեմ ճանաչում։ Դե յետարի։ Ինչ ես գորում։ Գորում ես հետ են ասում սովետական։ Սովետականը ես եմ։ Դու ինչ սովետական ես։ Ոչխար եմ պահում, բուրդ եմ խուսում, խոտ եմ հնձում։ Սովետական հավաքն է, որ կնիկ չունի, ժամանակ էլ չունի կնիկ բերի։ Բանիր եմ սարքում, կարակ եմ սարքում, ոչխար եմ լողացնում։
Ուրիշի ոչխար ես մորթում։ Այդ սովետական հավաքն ինչ էր անում։
Հա, ուրիշի ոչխարել եմ մորթում, դու լավ եմ անում, քո ինչ գործն է։
Գողություն ես անում հետնել ասում սովետական։
Դու լավ եմ անում, քո ինչ գործն է։ Ինչ գողություն, ինչ ոչխար։ Այդ օրը ես քաղաք եմ եղել։ Դե գնա ապացուցի։ 800 ոչխար եմ պահում։ Եկել խառնվել էին, բայց դա գողություն չի, եթե գողություններ կծախեին, ուրեմն դա գողություն չի։ Ասացին Պավլեն 5 րոպեի միս է անում, ասացինք չի անի, դե ուրեմն մեկ էլ փորձեցինք, ուրեմն դա գողություն չի։ Զավենն ուրեմն։
Ուրեմն առաջինը Պավլեն մորթեց։
Հա, Պավլեն մորթեց։
Ճիշտ է, հետո
Դե հետո ինչ մորթեցիք կերանք։
ասացիր Զավենը։
Ես ասի Զավեն, հա, ասացի Զավենը, բայց մի մամ մոռացել եմ։
Ինչ ես մոռացել, գուցե հարցերի միջոցով հիշենք։
Զավենն արտասանում էր մի անգամ միտեղ միշուն տաջիկ հայոց մազգը, այդ միտեղի անունը մոռացել։
Մոտավորապես ինչ անուն է, ասա կհիշենք։
Քաղաքի անունը էս կողմերի վրա։
Թիֆլիս։
Հա,
Ուրեմն Բերլին։
հա,
Փարիզ թե Հռոմ։
ոչ Փարիզ, ոչ ինչ ասի։
Հռոմ։
Հռոմ։ Հա,
Դե լավ, դա կարևոր չի։ Հետո ավակն ինչ էր անում։
դա մեկս մի բան անում ենք, էլի ով էր հիշում։
Բայց ավակն ինչ էր անում։
Դու կհիշեիր օրինակ։
Եթե նշանավոր դեպք լիներ կհիշեի։
Բայց ինչ իմանայի նշանավոր դառնալու որ հիշի։
Ախր ուրիշի ոչխար էի կմորթում։
Էլի ուրիշի։ Ախր այդ ուրիշը մեզ հետ էր, ուրեմն մեզ հետ էր նա կերա, ուրեմն դա ուրիշի չէր։
Լավ։ Ուրիշ ովքեր կային։
Բոլորս եկայինք։
Բոլորն ովքեր։
Ես մեկը ես։
Մյուսը Պավլեն, մյուսը Զավենը, մյուսը ավակը, մյուսը Վասիլը։
Ոչ, իմ կարծիքով ոչ։ Աբովյան Ասատուր Գևորգի, Աբովյան Եղիշ Գրիգորի ծննդյան թվերն էլ ասեմ։
Ոչ։
Աբովյան Հարություն Արտավազդի, Աբովյան Միքայել, Գևորգի, Աբովյան Վաչիկ Լևոնի, Աբովյան Մանուկ Ալեքսանդրի, գրիր, լուրջ եմ ասում գրիր, Աբովյան Աշոտ Վաղաշագի, Անտոնյան Իշխան, ես եմ, Իշխան Սահակի, Բարսեղյան Սահակ Սարգսի, ինչ որ եղել են եմ ասում, ես ինձանից բաներ չեմ կարող հնարել, չնայած ես քեզ շատ եմ հարգում։ Բարսեղյան Թորոս Թակվորի, Բադալյան Բագրատ Մաթևոսի, Բրուտյան Մարգար Տիգրանի, Բինոյան Ասադուր Առաքելի, Գևորգյան Վարազդատ Գևորգի, Մովսեսյան Ռևազներ քեզ նվեր։ Մի 5 ամիս նստիր մեր գյուղում ստուգիր պարզիր, որ 40 մարտով Մովսեսյան Ռևազներ քեզ նվեր։ Երկու ոչխար են կերել, երկուսն էլ կուտեն խուզից հետո քեզ էլ համեցեք կանենք։
Շատ բարի։ 5 ամիս կնստեմ այստեղ ու կպարզեմ, որ ոչխարները եկել են խառնվել քո հոտին։ Դու տվել ես մորթելու։
Հոտնի մը չի, այդ տնտեսությանն է։
Համե։ Դու տվել ես մորթելու։ Դու ոտքերը բռնել ես ավակը մորթել է, ոտքերը բռնել ես Զավենը, Պավլեն մորթել է։ Այդ քեզ 4։ Այս 4-ը բավական է։ Մյուսները կգնան իրենց գործին, դու կգնաք աշխատանքային կաղոտ։
Չէ, Պավլեն մորթել է, Թորոսը շամփուրները շարել է, Սահակը շարել է, Սակոն աղա արել է, Վասիլը փողը տվել է, Վանին կրակը վարել է, ես կերել եմ, բոլորս կերել են, Ռևազը կերել է, Ռևազն ասել է շնորհակալություն։
Բայց խառնվել են քո հոտին, ոտքերը բռնել ես դու, մորթել է ավակը, մորթել է Պավլեն, ոտքերը բռնել է Զավենը։
Լուծով հիվանդացել է Ռևազը, շնորհակալություն ասել է Սակոն, կուշտ կերել է Բարսեղը։
Մորթել է ավակը, մորթել է Պավլեն։
Զարմանալի մարդ ես դու ել, թե որ մեջներիս ամենալավ մորթանողը Պավլեն է, հել ով պիտի մորթեր։
Քո դանակով։
Ճիշտ եմ ասում։ Դու խելոք։ Բա քո դանակով էի մորթելու։ Ախր դու քաղաքում էիր։ Հա, ես դանակով եմ մորթել, որտեվ քո ատրճանակը մոտս չէր, ինչ եմ ստորագրելու, դուր տեսնեմ։ Հեյ!
Oh my god, we're cracking up over here.
Cracking up.
I had to mute the mic. Oh man,
I mean, what do you say to that?
I mean,
Writing, the acting.
Meg, I mean,
Absolutely
the
brilliant.
monologue. Meg, you're right. It's unbelievable. Like the acting is just, oh my god, it's just amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. You guys have to go if you haven't seen
Cheeks
these
a little-
movies.
This especially, yeah. It's such a great film overall. The directing, the acting, the writing, everything is sort of firing up.
It feels like they didn't even take it like it was done in one take.
dialogue.
Yeah.
Man, it was just
And there's the scene we saw part of it. You know, there's the whole build up to it.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite scenes out of any film.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a classic.
too much fun.
So, talking about we talked about a little bit, the Armenian as far as filmmaking now. What would you say the current state of funding for Armenian filmmakers, and how does it compare to other countries with, let's say, similar film industries?
Yeah, so we have less money that's being dispersed now, and we're making less films, just a handful of films every year. It's very competitive. It doesn't. We don't have as many opportunities as some of the, some other countries. It's harder and harder to make films because it's harder and harder to get access to some of that financing. There's less resources, less equipment, but we're still making films. We're still producing some really quality films from Armenia, just not at a pace and not at a level that we would like to. It just comes down to those two things: money and resources.
funding.
I mean, as far as the government funding, I mean, obviously here government doesn't fund.
Correct.
It's all private funding.
private
Correct.
funding. What is the issue? Is it lack of money from let's say wealthy people there that don't want to, or is it from here? I mean, what is the solution to this?
Well, I think we can have a very long conversation about what the solution is. But the problem is
We're still an hour in, so
yeah, no. Very happy to talk about those topics. I think other countries do have, I think, a larger pool of funds to work from, if you will. We just have, again, a fraction of that. And we don't have the resources that other countries do.
but why depend on the government? That's what I mean. Why not?
You have to depend on the government. I mean,
My point of this question was because we deal with the same thing, right? We've mentioned this 1,000 times. We have so many ideas. We're actually working on something that we're funding it ourselves on a smaller scale. How do we get those people who have the money?
Yeah,
from
well,
the diaspora and to invest into
Correct, right.
to tell our story the right way.
Yeah.
To be able to show it in film festivals or even get it on the big cinema over
this is
here.
a big combo.
Now we're getting something interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously, now we're going beyond the resource, the funding that's coming from the government, right?
Yeah.
Now we're talking about private money. We're talking about outside investors. So, first of all, if we're talking about films being produced in Armenia, people who are going to give you money to make a film in Armenia are going to be asking questions like, when am I going to get my money back? And what kind of return am I going to get? And who's attached to this project? And how are you, what are the resources that you have to make this film? No one's going to write a blank check, right? So I think the first question is making sure that the film projects that we're developing, we have a clear plan for. We have a clear trajectory in terms of what we're hoping to get out of them. But you're right. There's a lot of money that I think we could, divert into film production. We just need to be smarter about it. We need to approach it more like a business, right? Because anybody who wants to invest in a film is investing in a film. They're trying to understand what
ROI.
What am I going to get out of this?
But see, if I can push back on that a little bit, when we're talking about telling our stories, and when I say stories, it could be anything. It could be historical stories. It could be something from a current affair. I think there's a lack of telling stories about our heroes, and these heroes are so important, and they have to be brought back to life, starting from all the way from, Tigran the Great to so many other characters. Why does it always have to be return on investment? The way I see it is, if somebody who has money, somebody who's successful, they'll give $2 million to, again, nothing against the church, it's fine. But why? I mean, because they're not getting that back, right? It's an investment towards the church, because it's a belief. It's something to make the church
because it's
bigger, stronger, whatever. I understand. So why not come up with in a way where it's that money is going towards let's call it a nonprofit organization, then takes that money and invests it into these films. Again, my thing is always, we need to tell our story in every possible way. Sometimes even through the point of view of other cultures, to bring it to the masses.
Look, that makes it interesting for different marketplaces, but the reality of the world right now is, and I'm not trying to counter argue what you're saying, but kind of sort of am, is the reality of it is everybody has this idea that if they're going to invest in something, they want just 0.5%, 1%, 1.5%, whatever the case is.
How about the gratification that you just made this come to life?
Sure. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, 100% in a perfect world, we would want that. Or would we not?
Yeah. But
the reality of it is, it's just they have colleagues here in the U.S. market or elsewhere. Oh, I invested this much money in this movie and and I got this much back.
Okay, let me rephrase the question.
I don't think you need to, because I think what you're saying is on a very basic level. If it costs $2 million to build another church, which we have many of them, what if instead of putting that money there, which again, we're just sort of spending to not necessarily get a return from, we take maybe half of that and put it into a film project and tell our own stories, and not as a form of investment, but as a form of, further telling the story of the Armenian people. So I completely agree with you. And, I talked about some of the goals and mission, of Armenian Film Society. Our goal and hope is to be able to reach that point one day where any access that we have to funds, we can, we can invest, we can sort of like,
because as a nonprofit, it's beneficial for the investor.
We do that on a very, very small level now, but virtually every money we make goes into the organization, which then goes into telling more of our stories. Now, we're not talking millions of dollars, not yet, but our goal is to be able to at least be able to do a little bit more that's being done than now. But if there are people around the world who understand what you're talking about, the value and the importance of telling our stories, maybe not for return. I mean, you can even look at it as how valuable would it be if we just had better educational content on YouTube, right? Like, forget cinema for a second, right?
Yeah,
if we just had better education.
That's kind of, grain in the sand in the beach.
But even that does so much, right? It's another way of being able to learn and understand and educate yourself on what's happening. So I think all of these are very important, questions, and we need to do a better job at telling that story, telling our stories, which is why it's so important for me to tell diverse stories.
Of course,
you talked about the heroes. That is such an important part of it, and then another part of it is just telling authentic stories about our lives and our families, right? You look at films like, go ahead.
So I'm sure Netflix, this new, it's called Beef.
Yeah.
Okay. So I watched it.
Yeah.
I honestly had no idea what it was about. It was just like, I was bored. I'm like, let me watch this. Great. I mean, I liked it. And the whole time I was watching it, I was like, how easy would it be if this was an Armenian story with Armenian characters happening in Hollywood or Glendale or, because those things do happen to Armenians on a daily basis. Why isn't there something being done like that? Completely American story, but with Armenian characters, with Armenian names and things like that. We're lacking that as well.
We are.
So, I mean, again, I don't want this to sound like we're we're complaining about it, but it is the truth. And I feel like storytelling is the most powerful tool you can have to advance your history, knowledge of your history, your culture, your heritage. Absolutely. And I feel like for the past, we since let's call it the diaspora has kind of become larger and larger especially in the United States, and this is going back after the genocide, right? We've concentrated so much on this 1915, the genocide, which we covered with Gevorg. It went from where it was about our lands and this and that to becoming the just recognize the thing. And every year it's become less and less and less and less important. But at the same time we've forgotten about how to tell our stories. I think that's more powerful than constantly going and demanding, because imagine if we spent all that time in the 60s, in the 70s, and told our stories through film to the masses, not just Armenia, where we would have been, how more people would have known about our trials and tribulations.
But to your point, or piggybacking off of what you're saying, maybe you would know more about this. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, those films didn't come out of the Soviet Union, right? Like, what do you mean? Is that what you're saying? Like with a lot of the stories that were told in the 50s, 60s, now it's finally kind of reaching an audience outside the diaspora.
I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a diaspora here in the 60s and the 70s. So, how many famous actors that are Armenian?
That's what I'm saying, is a lot of those films, because we were the Soviet Union, right? We were SS Armenia. Those films didn't come out to the United States.
No, I understand the Armenian films did. I'm talking about the diaspora here. I mean, how many famous actors there are from 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s that are of Armenian heritage that nobody knew about. And now all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it. Oh, did you know this person was Armenian? Did you know that person was Armenian? That's where I feel like we should have started telling our stories.
Sure. And it's a different landscape now, obviously, than it was back then, right? We didn't have access to, filmmaking in the way that we do now. And there was a studio system, and it was, independent films didn't exist in the way that they do now. But you're right. I mean, it is a very complex, topic to discuss, because there's so many different layers to it. Parasite won Best Picture a couple of years ago, a Korean film. We're not going to make a film that ends up winning Best Picture. We have to, you look back, and what I mean by that is, like, you trace back Korean cinema over the last couple decades. They're doing what you're talking about. They're making films, and they're building on those successes. They're building on those stories until they are able to make something accessible to the masses that gets the attention that it deserves, and then wins Best Picture.
How big are Korean movies on Netflix? I mean, it's unbelievable. And they're great quality films.
They also huge. Their version of diaspora here and in Canada, right?
Yeah.
So,
but they invest, like these countries. They invest in their cinema.
And that's what I'm trying to get to.
Totally. They treat cinema as an important part of their culture, because they know how important it is and to build on their culture. They allocate resources. They have the proper infrastructure. We haven't even talked about infrastructure, which is such an important part, right? People always ask, why don't they go film the next, like, Lord of the Rings in Armenia or Game of Thrones in Armenia? We have the landscapes. We have these beautiful parts of Armenia. I'm not a subject matter expert here, but really why they do those things, why they film projects and films and TV shows in countries like New Zealand and all these other places, comes down to two things. Proper infrastructure, which means they have proper crew. They can hire hundreds of thousands of people. They have the proper studios and sound stages and equipment and resources. And then the next thing is tax incentives and tax breaks. You film in another country like Canada and New Zealand and what have you, and you get 20% tax break, which means you get 20% of your budget back. Armenia doesn't have that. Armenia doesn't have the infrastructure that some of these countries have, and they don't have the tax break. And until we work on those pieces, when we talk about filming in Armenia, which, by the way, is more than just like showing our landscapes, and it's economically, it could do so much, right?
Of course.
So that's another element. I know it's not related to what you were saying, but another huge part of it, because we need to some extent, approach filmmaking as a business. But I think it's both sides. It's investing in it as a form of art and telling our stories, and then it's also let's invest in it from a filmmaking, from a business perspective. So someone like Steven Spielberg or Peter Jackson will say, I want to go film in Armenia. We already know it has all the great landscapes and locations, which are untapped. They've never been shown in film, but they're also getting something out of it. What are we giving them?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Great point. Let me ask you something. Since you guys are a nonprofit, let's say we have a listener who's wealthy and all of a sudden realizes that they want to invest in some kind of project. How do they get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, you can get a hold of us just by going to our website or social media, ArmenianFilmSociety.com, ArmenianFilmSociety@gmail.com. We're very easy to get a hold of.
Yeah.
And we've been very fortunate. People have reached out to us and they've seen the value of being able to contribute. Everything we've done this far has been essentially privately financed by ourselves. We've had some very generous folks over the years, but that's something that we're very interested in exploring for this next year, and then being able to establish a program that allows us to invest funds into the next generation of filmmakers and storytellers.
Yeah. Now, I know we touched on over the last few minutes about filmmaking from or bringing in influence from abroad, right? What about Armenian filmmakers or Armenian actors, actresses, whatever the case is, from the diaspora? What kind of impact have they had on Armenian cinema and Armenian film?
Yeah, so not necessarily Armenian cinema and Armenian film, but someone I'd like to talk about a lot is Ruben Mamoulian.
Okay.
An Armenian from Georgia, came to the US and started making films in the Hollywood studio system, early years 30s and beyond. And he made some incredible Hollywood films, some of which you might know. One of them considered one of the best horror films of all time, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
Directed by an Armenian. Now, that doesn't necessarily...
That I did not know.
Yeah, so...
Wow.
And he was an original director of Cleopatra. He directed some of the biggest actors. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is such an influential film to not just horror cinema, but even beyond that, made by a proud Armenian who was working in the Hollywood studio system. So maybe not necessarily influencing Armenian films, but had a huge role. And I think also sometimes I hear people talking about as Armenians, we need to get into the film business and make a name for ourselves. It's already been done, right? We've had some really big successes. We've had a lot of these wins over the years. Now we need to do more, tell our stories. Yeah. We've had some, Schindler's List is written by an Armenian, we have these great storytellers. We just now need to tell our stories.
If I can add to his question, can you name some of the notable Armenians in the film industry today?
Yeah. Adam Egoyan is one of my favorite filmmakers because he's done, I think, an incredible job of balancing independent art films into a little bit more of the mainstream now. He's one of the most celebrated international filmmakers. He's Armenian from Canada, and he's worked with Oscar winners. He's been nominated for a couple of Oscars himself. And he's making a new film now. Steven Zalian, who I just mentioned, he's a writer who's worked with Martin Scorsese. He's worked with Steven Spielberg. He's worked with some of the biggest named directors. Writer of Schindler's List, won an Oscar for Schindler's List. Again, I hope people know that we have Armenian Oscar winners too.
Erica is Israelian.
Eric Israelian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who's a producer, and over the last...
What about actresses and actors?
Many. I think there's some obvious ones like Cher and Angela Sarafian, who's working today. Joe Manganiello, who's a quarter Armenian, but he's very vocal, right? He's very vocal about his background. And this is an important part of it, is that somebody like Joe Manganiello, part Armenian, but he's so vocal. He's doing he has a platform, and he's doing such a good job at kind of telling our story and letting it be heard. But there's a lot of Armenian filmmakers, Sevohanyan, Natalie Kasabian, a husband and wife producing team who are doing some incredible work over the last couple of years. And really, Sevohanyan, He produced Space Jam, you know, with LeBron James. And so there's a lot of those filmmakers, and it's not just writers and directors and producers and actors. Even below the line, grips, you know, like Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favorite filmmakers. He's a director of There Will Be Blood and some massive movies. He works with these grips, these two brothers, Armenian brothers, on virtually all of his films. They're experts at what they do. You know, they're craftsmen, and Armenians are at our core just like really great at everything that we do.
Yes.
Right?
I have a mutual friend who actually builds some of the most amazing stages that are being filmed in movies, shows, and he's traveling all over the United States building stages. He's a stage builder. Young guy, my age.
Builders, man.
Yeah.
Builders.
We all play an important part of that puzzle, right?
Yeah.
When we think about the film and entertainment industry, there's a lot of people behind the scenes. There's a lot of people that you and I might not know about, but they're hugely influential in their respective fields. And that's what we need. We need more of that.
But you mentioned like someone like Karaoghlanian and some of these bigger people that have made it now and they're big producers. Are they... You know, sometimes I feel like people, when they make it, they might get caught up in call it the flow of the river of, you know, being in the Hollywood industry now. And, you know, are they, though, trying to somehow tell our story? Are they working on anything? It could be an American movie, but maybe the secondary character is Armenian. Yeah, sprinkle. Because I feel like that's what other cultures have done.
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's a great question. So Armen Karaoghlanian, I'm going to answer this. I'm going to take a little bit of a detour.
Okay.
Armen Karaoghlanian made a film called Ararat, which I think is misunderstood. And a lot of people don't like that film. And a lot of people don't understand what his intention was with that film. But whether you like it or you dislike it, he didn't make that film as his first, second, or third film. He spent years making artistic films that were at the Cannes Film Festival, that won international awards. He was nominated for Academy Awards, and then he made Ararat. So he built that sort of like credibility. He established himself as a major voice in cinema, and then he told his Armenian story. Now, again, it doesn't really matter what you think of the film, but that's one of the most intelligent ways to go about it. No one's going to sort of entertain, you know, an Armenian project if you've not made them any money, right?
Absolutely, of course.
But if you establish yourself in the way like a Karaoghlanian is doing, really penetrate and have that sort of penetrate like the industry, be an authoritative figure, have the credibility that he has now, for him to then turn around and say,
the gravity,
I've got a story here and it's got an Armenian character. So I know a lot of those emerging filmmakers, they take that approach because it allows them to have that sort of say to be able to then tell those stories. And it is happening.
Okay.
No,
that's good.
You're mentioning Armen Karaoghlanian, and we've talked about Sergei Parajanov, and I'm sure a lot of our audience know about them. What more can you tell us about the type of films that they were making? What kind of impact did they have? What kind of what were their, I don't want to call it influences, but what kind of influence did they want to leave on their filmmaking styles? Right,
and the future filmmakers,
and future filmmakers, absolutely, because a lot of people talk about them.
Sergei Parajanov is so popular these days because I think we're rediscovering, like you were talking about, we're like rediscovering these films. They're more accessible now, but you know, Lady Gaga made a music video like a couple of years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was like directly inspired by Parajanov. There's all these like, and they were very open about it. The director was talking about how he's inspired by it. It even like has Armenian references in it. Sergei Parajanov is one of the most fascinating figures in cinema history. He's one of the most respected filmmakers. He was jailed and wasn't able to, you know, make films the way he wanted to and was censored. But if you think about impact, some of the biggest and most established filmmakers at the time wrote letters petitioning for his release from prison.
I remember learning about this when I went to the museum. His museum.
Yeah. It's incredible. Like Federico Fellini and some of these big names, and Martin Scorsese, he has a film foundation which restores films. He restored Sergei Parajanov's films. So that impact and that influence is seen until today. And because over the last 10, 15 years since the film got restored and it's now more accessible, we're seeing more filmmakers sort of like take that style, take that influence and really make it their own.
Interesting.
I mean, it's everywhere you talk about Armenian cinema. Anytime I've ever had a conversation about it. I mean, and look, I'm not trying to act like some sort of professional about it, but I'm learning a lot tonight.
Yeah.
Parajanov's name comes up all the time.
Yep.
Number one name for any Armenian filmmaker is Parajanov.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right away.
Oscar nominations. Has Armenia ever received a nomination for, let's say, Best International Feature Film? And if not, why not?
We haven't. We've only submitted a handful of films. So the way it works is every year, every country is allowed to pick one film and submit it to the Oscars. So they actually have a committee, and Armenia has its own committee, their own committee body, where they will watch the 5 films made that year and they'll pick one. And this is a very controversial thing because sometimes, and now this is not just an Armenian thing, but sometimes not the right films or the films that you would imagine don't get selected. We actually saw this with RRR. It was an Indian film that came out last year. It was like hugely popular. Wasn't chosen to be represented, for the Academy Awards. So Armenia does that. We've only submitted a handful of times. I want to say like 10 times. We just haven't had, the films to submit. And then what happens is everyone submits, every country submits, and then the Academy will sort of put together a short list of 15 or so films. Like these are the 15 that have made the cut, the short list, and then they'll narrow that down to 5. We've never gotten that far. We've never had a nomination. But if you look at...
Have we even been in the top 15?
No.
Wow.
But if you look at...
Jeez.
But you know what? I'm very optimistic. This past year we had a very strong contender backed by Eric Israelian called Aurora Sunrise, which was an animated documentary about Aurora Mardikyan.
We have a trailer. You want to show that?
I'd love to.
Okay, give me a second. Let me bring that up. Sunrise.
Possibly imagine how important your story is.
So this would fall based on the films coming out. Do you want to show the Amerikatsi after this? Let's talk about this a little bit and then we'll show Amerikatsi.
Sooner or later, all you're going to die. There will be no one single Armenian to leave.
Very cool style.
Yeah.
We had a good shot with this.
Really cool style.
Really good shot. It's very difficult to get nominated for Best Foreign Film, Best International Film, but this
and being animation.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to ask you about. Are you seeing? I mean, I might phrase this wrong. More animation styles? Is that becoming like a stronger approach towards storytelling with, let's say, Armenians?
That's a good
These
question.
days? Yeah.
Animation has always actually been a part of Armenian filmmaking.
Yeah.
If you go to the National Cinema Center's YouTube, you'll discover some like great short animated projects. But
Stuff we grew up on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we actually have some really great animation like agencies and production companies in Armenia. The company that worked on this, they're incredible. They do really great work. But there is a lot more of that coming out. And this is animation, it's documentary, it's got live action in it.
Yeah.
It's got all these different elements. We're actually having an event on the 19th with the director Ina Sahakian at the Glendale Library. We're going to sit down and talk about the craft of the film, all the different elements and how she was able to make a story like this where she's incorporating all these different kinds of filmmaking methods. But this was a good, this was chosen as Armenia's submission to the Oscars. It had a really good shot. You know, fortunately it doesn't make the cut, but the way I look at it is let's keep building on that success. And maybe we'll get nominated and recognized in that category. Maybe we'll have a filmmaker that's recognized in one of the others. Another film that came out of Armenia last year is called Amerikatsi by
we have that trailer.
Michael
Let's
Guccian.
let's show.
Что, пригласила сюда американцев?
Нашего сына — это самое малое, что мы можем для него сделать.
My wife passed away a few years ago. God rest her soul.
Թունավորեք նրանց ուղերձները ձեր ստոր հակակոմունիստական արժեքներով։
Ասմարտիկը իսկական հայ չեն, ասոնք իրենց հոգին սադանային ծախած են։
Все, уже почти закончили и можем отправлять в Сибирь.
Մենք չենք գնա։ Սա մեր տունն է։
What a great
That
trailer.
looks awesome.
That looks awesome. You know, I wanted to ask you, I've noticed a lot of like even the Aurora one, there's a lot of films that you see these trailers, right? And some of them are like 2-3 years old, but you can't find them anywhere. Like I know they go to film festivals and they show them there, but okay, you went through all the 800 film festivals and this, like where can we access this stuff? Where can we watch them?
It's tough. It's
like
actually,
they shelf it. Like
it's actually why I originally kind of got interested in Armenian films, because when I was writing about them, I was writing about films that were like 4 or 5 years old, and I still couldn't find a way to watch them. And it's an ongoing thing. It's tough to get distribution. It's tough to find a way to make your films accessible in a way that makes sense for the filmmakers and everybody involved. So after a film festival run, they'll typically try to sell the film. They'll try to find a home for it. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's difficult to find a place for that film to live where it makes sense for the filmmakers in terms of like their investment and what they get in return from it. And a lot of times they'll just sort of sit around and won't
collect dust.
They'll kind of collect dust.
I hate to say it, yeah.
Another problem that we're trying to solve as an organization. I haven't publicly talked about this, so maybe it's like an exclusive.
If you feel comfortable.
It's an exclusive.
All right. Let's go.
Armenian Film Society is launching its own streaming service.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Very nice. I was thinking it.
Yeah. Well, it's hard not to bring that up when we're talking about something like
That's
this.
all.
Yeah.
The idea here is that Now, realistically, we're going to have to start small.
Of course.
It comes down to resources. It comes down to money, because to license films, it's obviously very expensive. And these films cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to make. But there are a lot of films sitting and collecting dust. And there's a lot of filmmakers who we reached out to over this past year or so. And we said, do you have any films that you'd want to add to a streaming service like ours? And a lot of filmmakers who had short films, documentaries, different projects said, yeah, they're just sort of sitting either on my website or on my Vimeo or nowhere, and no one can find it. Now, we have a very engaged audience at Armenian Film Society. We have people who want to see films, and read about, these different films. And so we're going to be a home where you can discover some of these films. Obviously, our goal here is to be able to actually go in and distribute a film like Armen Karaoghlanian or Sunrise. And there's obviously a lot of streaming services out in the world. The world doesn't need another one, but the world does need one for Armenian films.
Just make sure you have the app. That's the way. No, I'm serious. That's the way. You got to have the app for both Android TV and for Apple TV. Because
streaming services.
I mean, what is that one? The Christian one that they have the app and their show, The Chosen one. Is it called The Chosen one? I'm not sure. They went with the whole thing. They created an app. And you can only watch it on their app. And that app can be, you can use that app to stream it to your TV or whatever, right? But at the same time, what I wanted to add is, like you said, let's say Armen Karaoghlanian, for example, it's being shelved right now. Well, why not bring it onto your platform in a way, even if it's like, you want to watch it, just like on YouTube TV, you want to watch it, you buy it for $3.99 or whatever. I'm sorry, I'm willing to pay $10 to watch this film because I'm hungry for it. And I know that there's a lot of us Armenians who would love to watch these films.
Yeah, just to clarify, Armen Karaoghlanian is not sort of like shelved in their case.
I'm bringing it as an example.
They and a lot of these other films, what they'll try to do is obviously any filmmaker's goal and anyone involved with the film, their number one goal is to get this distributed in theaters.
Of course.
In as many screens as possible. And then you kind of work unfortunately backwards. Sort of say, well, can we get some kind of limited release, or can we get this film on a streaming service? And so every film is different and they've got their own, processes to work through. But you're right. I think ultimately our goal would be able to at least catch the ones who are sort of like, all right, well, we want to stream this somewhere and we can upload it to Amazon and hope it finds an audience. But the benefit with Armenian Film Society is our audience is actively looking for it.
There you go.
There's a lot of Armenian films on Amazon. But you know what? If you don't know what you're looking for,
are there really?
Yeah, there are.
But if you don't know what you're looking for, you're never gonna.
Seriously, I'm not kidding you. Like I had no clue.
Yeah. I mean, just type in Armenian movie and trust me, a lot will come up. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you don't know to look for that stuff,
exactly.
Right? But on our service, you're there for a reason. You're there to find.
You guys already have the following. You have your audience.
It's a destination point.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But you should be able to see both of these films soon, later this year. They are both working on getting the films in theaters. I've seen them.
Armen Karaoghlanian should. I mean, that's just the quality of the way it's shot. Like, I feel like it's a World War II movie that
historic time period.
So Michael Gujan is an Emmy-winning actor who's also directed several films. And he had said many years ago that he'd like to make a film in Armenia. And a lot of people will make comments like, I'd like to visit Armenia. I'd like to make a film there. Yeah. He followed through during COVID. He actually shot this movie during COVID, went out of his way to actually take the script that he had written, go film it entirely in Armenia with Armenian resources and Armenian sort of crew. And he made what I think is one of the best films that has come out of Armenia. It's whimsical. It's very funny. It's very tragic. And one of the things that I love, because it sort of reaffirms what we do, is he had reached out to us and he said, one of the lead actors in this film, I discovered it through your page at Armenian Film Society. I couldn't cast I couldn't cast an actor to play this role. And I was on your page one day.
That's wild.
And I saw you posted about this actor, and I reached out to him. I thought he'd be perfect, and he said yes. In a perfect world, in an ideal world, and hopefully in the future, we do more of that. We become this sort of like home and destination, and actually help produce some of these films in that capacity.
That's amazing. Well,
that's awesome news.
Yeah, I can't wait. I honestly, I saw this trailer a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I've been waiting, and I'm like, where can I watch this movie? So hopefully sooner than later. Are there any other films coming out from Armenia that you're excited that we should look forward to?
These are the big ones because they are both incredible and they're the most recent ones. There's a lot of short films. There's a lot of like not feature. There's a couple feature documentaries that are coming out of there. Obviously, a lot of them deal with Artsakh, but they deal with them in very, very interesting ways and very surprising ways. And a lot of great shorts coming out. I think this new generation of filmmakers, unfortunately, it takes a little bit of time because it's so hard to make these films and takes so much time. But I've seen a lot of them. I'm so excited. A lot of Armenian women filmmakers, a lot of really great stuff that's coming out right now.
Yeah, there's a ton of talent. I mean, being a digital artist myself, I've connected with a bunch of people in Armenia. The talent over there is undeniable. Yeah. Like even them, and you get a few people who are storytellers besides being artists, right? It's absolutely mind-blowing when you talk to some of these people. And nothing taken away from the past, but God, it's kind of blowing up right now. There's something
brewing.
Yeah, we're having, I think, that new emergence, right? This new wave, like in cinema history, we have like the French New Wave.
Yes,
and different movements. I predict we're gonna have a really great boom because of all of the different factors that we're talking about.
100%.
Yeah, we've both, obviously this podcast has given us the opportunity to be involved in some events, and we've come across and met some amazing young talent who are, like you said, they growing up here on American, watching American films, seeing how they were shot, those camera movements, the quality, the acting and everything. I feel like this new generation has caught up to that and surpassed it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I agree with you that there's some amazing stuff that's going to come out. Just that trailer alone, watching that, Armen Karaoghlanian is like, it tells you that look what can be done.
And this is now, like a 2-year-old product almost, right? And there's just like more and more stuff being made, and more filmmakers kind of breaking in and making their first film, second films. There's gonna be a lot of exciting stuff coming out.
Well, we kind of covered the 100 years, and I hope the next 100 years will be one day our grandchildren will be sitting there and having the same conversation.
Sit back here 100 years from now.
Huh?
Are we going to be here 100 years?
No. I'm talking about our grandchildren.
Let's meet again in 100 years.
100 years. We'll be watching them from above. But my point is, in 100 years, hopefully somebody, our grandchildren, can talk about, hey, this boom started in 2023. And then they can talk about the great Armenian cinema of 200 years. I know we kind of mentioned, but is there anything else you want to mention about Armenian Film Society that people should look for coming up? Anything exciting or?
It's funny. I'm glad you asked that. I said at the beginning, we started off doing one event a month. In March, we did like 6 events. In April, we've got like 6 events. There's a lot. But I'm excited because when we put on an event, I think back to like the 19-year-old version of myself. I think like, what did I not have access to? What did I wish I was going to? And hopefully, I think we're putting on those kinds of events. So this on the 16th, on the 100-year anniversary of Armenian cinema, day and date, we have a screening of Armenian filmmaker Vic and Mike's film called Alter Ego, about the life of Gomitas, playing at the AMC Americana free admission. And then on the 19th at the Glendale Library, we're having Ina Sahakian, director of Aurora Sunrise, come and talk about the craft of her film. And then 21st and 22nd, we're in San Diego. We've got our own film that we're involved in, and we're showing that film to their community there. And then
is that the documentary?
Yeah, so we executive produced a short documentary last year, which was made by this young Armenian filmmaker named Tigran Nersisyan, who made a film about his childhood memories in Ashtarak. And we fell in love with it. It's such a hopeful and optimistic film. It's about, growing up and family and memories. And we've had a couple screenings at different college campuses, and we're sharing it with those communities. We went to Fresno, Irvine, USC, UCLA. We're going to San Diego next week. And then I'll be lecturing at the UC San Diego campus on the history of Armenian films, much like we talked about here. Yeah. And then the 24th is a big one. The Alex Theater, at the Alex Theater, the city of Glendale every year hosts Armenian Genocide commemorative event. And every year they have a different topic and theme. This year, their theme is the Armenian experience through the lens, sort of tying in the 100 years of Armenian cinema. Cool. So we're doing something really exciting there. There's a big program. And then one of the elements of it is we're going to show the first 10 minutes of Aurora Sunrise, and the director's going to come and introduce it and speak. And then we're going to have Joe Manganiello.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Who's obviously not only been very vocal about his background, but recently, if you saw the PBS
of course,
show, he talks about his great grandmother and his history with his family, and he's going to be on stage talking about his Armenian background.
That's awesome. See, that's
all coming
we
together.
Need things like this.
Wow, that's great. How can people get tickets to that event?
Yeah, City of Glendale posted about the event recently. Tickets are free. They're available at their
first come first serve.
Get them.
This is on the 24th.
24th.
Okay.
Evening.
Wow. I can make it. That's a 24th is what?
It's a Monday.
It's a Monday?
Oh yeah, I could make it.
Oh, okay. Go get the tickets, man.
Go get the tickets. On me, bro.
Can that be your date?
Sure.
All right. Well, this was a great conversation. We really enjoyed it. I love films. I love cinema, and I love Armenian films. And I'm glad we got to do this. Something different.
Not talking about
heavy history. Yeah.
We're talking about Armenian films.
Man. Yeah.
Heritage.
I want to thank the audience who joined us tonight. We appreciate it. Some people say they got to go to bed.
Good night, Matt.
Yeah, good night.
We love you, but good night.
It's still a little bit early. But before we end the show, I wanted to talk about the event, the Mer Talk event. Yeah. First of all, I want to thank everyone who showed up on a Thursday night, rainy night.
Some of you from far away.
San Diego.
Yes. Palm
Springs. Abiding.
Thank you. Thank you for the Atlas book maps. Yeah. You remembered.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
We got a few gifts, few books. Our audience, they brought us some books that we haven't read yet. So we had a good, not good. I think it was an amazing turnout. We had close to 200 people show up. We weren't even expecting that much. So thank you to everyone who did. I'm going to show a couple of pictures here where. Let me see here. This is from the event. About
the streaming, because I know that a bunch of people have asked if they can watch.
So it has been professionally shot. It is in post-production. We're working on it. We will have that hopefully next week on YouTube for everybody else to watch it. Nelly, I know you were there. I saw you. Thank you. She actually asked really great questions during the Q&A. But something happened right before we went on stage, and we were last minute told that there were some important people that wanted to get on stage and talk about some stuff. And I want to thank the Los Angeles County Commissioner, David Gevorkian, who actually was present there. And with Gevork Nazarian and us, we were given a bunch of recognition
things,
certificates, which was such a surprise. And you can see in the pictures right there, we were completely not expecting this, but
goofy face.
Yeah. I honestly didn't even know how to react to it, but we are honored. We are thankful. I want to thank the mayor of Pasadena, Victor Gordo. I want to thank the mayor of Glendale, Artashes Kasakian. We all know him.
Yep.
Assessor of LA County, Jeffrey Prang, Congresswoman Judy Chu, Senator Anthony Portantino. These are all amazing people who recognized what we do and what Gevork does. So again, we are humbled. We were shocked. We are thankful. And again, I think the feedback from the show has been amazing. I got sick after that.
Yes,
I've been MIA, so I had to recover. But it is, you guys will see it. We're, like I said, it's in post-production. We're waiting for it. I want it to be done the right way, and we'll have it available for you guys on YouTube. But again, this was our first event. We're planning more. So we'll, follow us on Instagram. We'll let you know when the next one will be. And people love the food, love the catering. We want to thank again all the sponsors who helped us. Crystal Bartenders, Armo Coffee. People loved it. Making the coffee with the sand.
Yeah, with the sand.
Taras and everything.
Yeah, it was cool.
The catering. Just overall, and an amazing crowd.
Thank you to our sponsors.
Thank you for making us feel comfortable on stage. It was our first time doing this, and it felt natural.
I don't know, man. I was nervous. I don't know about you. Yeah, I'm not good in front of cameras, man. This I've gotten used to, but that thing on stage.
No,
I'm not gonna lie, guys. I was nervous.
Yeah, but again, I just wanted to mention that and thank everybody who was there. I think next one will be a lot bigger.
Hopefully.
Well, we're almost at 2 hours in. Anything you want to mention, Armen, before we call it a night?
No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for coming on
your event. It's really great to see you guys do such great meaning.
Thank you.
Well, you're doing a lot with Armenian film and bringing awareness to Armenian film and whatnot and everything that goes with it. Man, I can't wait till that streaming service.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we will. You have our support in any way we can help you guys out, and we're excited. We're working on some stuff as well.
Can't wait.
Some animation things that are coming together. Like I said, it's in the air. I feel like everything's coming together. So
snowball it.
If you guys, we at the end of the show, we always say, well, before we say that, follow us on Instagram. I want to thank a lot of new people have been supporting us on Patreon. Thank you to everybody who is joining us. If you guys want to support the show, go to patreon.com/Med Herosner. Starts at $5. Just it helps. Follow us on Instagram for all the new announcements. Like I said, next week, I'm hoping next week we'll have that video up for Med Talk. And do we know who our guest is next? No, I don't think so. Not yet, right?
It's just me and you, dude.
Yeah.
History talk.
Okay. All right.
History talk.
Okay, guys. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. As we always say at the end of the night, respect one another.
Love one another.
Until the next episode, take care of yourselves.